Education Committee. So I met Judy in 2017 when she taught her wildlife rehabilitation course. I think I took it at UMass Amherst back then. And it helps folks prepare for the state exam. I'm always impressed by your compassion, patience for people and wildlife, and your extensive knowledge. It's amazing. She has been a wildlife rehabilitator for 17 years and holds both a state and federal permit for migratory songbird rehabilitation. She is the founder of Cummington Wildlife, Inc., a small nonprofit specializing in the rehabilitation of songbirds and lagomorphs. She is a board member for Wildlife Rehabilitation Association of Massachusetts, and she runs the mentor program. Or do you run it?
I'm the head of the committee. I started the committee, and I'm the chairperson of that committee.
All right. You do so much. And she's an awesome mentor for new rehabilitators who are interested in rehabilitating songbirds and rabbits. I know you'll enjoy the presentation. We've asked to hold questions until the end. And Judy, I am going to hand it right over to you.
Hey, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you everybody for having me at your club. I'm really excited about this next presentation I'm going to be giving. It's about reuniting baby birds. We get a lot of telephone calls in the spring and summer about baby birds that are on the ground. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation about that, whether the bird can go back in the nest or has to go into rehab or just leave it alone. And I'm hoping that together we can, help educate the general public about what to do if a baby bird is on the ground so that really good decisions are made. I'm going to just tell you in advance that this PowerPoint I'm going to show you was originally made for wildlife rehabilitators with only state permits, not the federal permit, which means that they can only work with non-native birds. So there are going to be some pictures of non-native birds. I know that can be a very sensitive topic for folks, but the concepts that I'm showing are the same whether it's non-native or native. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my video because I never like to see myself talking, and I'm going to share the screen with everybody. So just give me a minute. It just takes a minute to pull it all up. Because I discovered if you go really fast, it doesn't work really well. All right, so you should be starting to see the screen, and I will get it on, come on, get it on a little bigger mode. Okay. All right, and let me just move some folks over that so I can see. Hang on a second. Okay, 1 minute more. There we go. All right. So we're going to talk about reuniting baby birds, something I'm really interested in making sure everybody does correctly, because it's just so important. And when I'm trying to make decisions about whether a bird needs to be in care or on the ground, I'm looking at three general categories. One is the developmental stages of the bird, looking at the behavior or health of the bird, and also looking at the location and safety hazards, which I think is actually the harder thing to be able to do. So let's just go over the developmental stages, and I'm only going to cover hatchling, nestling, and fledgling stages because those are the ones that we need to know about it when we're dealing with baby birds on the ground. All right, so let's talk about hatchlings. So hatchlings are birds that have just been hatched, just like the name suggests, to about day 4. They are really fragile little creatures. Generally speaking, it's bare skin. Some of them will have down on it, and I'll show you that in a minute. You might see a few feather tracks, but again, they're birds without any real feathers. Their eyes are sealed shut. They can't thermoregulate, so they need to be kept warm. And generally, in the nest, that's going to be mom or dad bird, brooding them with their warm body and keeping them warm. And this would be what down looks like. And for the general public, they basically tell me that the down looks a little bit like cotton or fur. But that kind of down that you see cannot keep a bird warm. Again, it's not like real feathers. So you can see bare skin only or bare skin and down. and you get some birds like this adorable little dove that has lots of down on it. Oh my God, that's one of my favorite birds. Then they get a little bit older around day 5, and for the next week or so, you get nestlings, and nestlings are starting to actually become looking like real birds. They're starting to open their eyes. And that's really cool because, again, they're seeing what I'm doing if I'm working with them. And they're getting what we call the pin feathers. We also hear them called blood feathers. And if you see my cursor over here, for people, a lot of people say it looks like it's almost quills on a bird. And what it is, it's their sheaths that are protecting the growing feather. And when the feather is ready to emerge, those sheaths get very, very brittle and the bird preens it off, and then those gorgeous feathers emerge. But for this stage in life, you're going to see the pin feathers, maybe a little down, and some bare skin. So a lot of times you're trying to figure out, is the nestling still a nestling or not? And a lot of times this is an area I look at right around the middle here. See that bare skin? That's telling me this bird is still a nestling because the feathers haven't completely covered the bird. So in order to get to the next stage, you're going to have a fully feathered bird. You're not going to have that bare spot there. That'd be really cold if they left the nest. So nestlings are, as they say in the name, still in a nest. So they really can't walk. They can't perch. They're just still being fed by their parents. But it's really interesting at this stage. When they get bigger and they get more feathers, even though they're not ready to leave the nest, you're not going to see the parents brooding them. And the reason is they're just too big. There's just too many bigger birds, and mom can't really cover them. And they've got enough feathers at that point that mom doesn't need to be there to keep them warm. And then, yay, they become fledglings. And that is just a fun stage. The little bird on the bottom, actually, I clipped that picture just as he was in the cage, and all of a sudden just flew up, landed there, and I said, well, you just fledged. Okay, isn't that adorable? So that's a little robin. So robins and other fledglings, you can see they're now fully feathered. You can see they don't have the pin feathers. They actually have feathers on their wings. And if you look at the head on the top picture, you see these little tendrils of feathers, and that is really one telltale sign that something is a fledgling. But the other main thing is you look at the tail. So they may look a lot like the adult, whoops, but the tails over here are really short. See how short they are? Usually it can be 1/4 to a 1/2 inch. And the adults have much longer tail, usually several inches long. So that short tail tells me that it's still a fledgling, but they can, perch and hop and walk just like the adults. And I just had to show this picture because it's bluebirds, and I love bluebirds, so I'm going to show a picture of bluebirds. All right, so finding baby birds on the ground. What do we do? Here's the thing. Any hatchling or nestling bird on the ground does not belong on the ground. If you look at this little bird on the grass, that's cold. That is way too cold for this bird. From the general public, I hear this a lot. I've been watching this bird for about 4 hours on the ground, and I know the mama is in the tree, and I'm waiting for her to come down and take care of it. Maybe she'll come down and bring the bird right back up in the tree, and that's impossible. There are, mammals like squirrels and raccoons that can grab their young if they fall and grab them by the scruff and carry them up on the tree, but mama bird can't do that. If her baby bird this young comes out of the nest and is on the ground, it's basically a lost cause. She can't, take care of them. Even if she was to feed the bird on the ground, when it becomes nighttime, she can't brood the bird on the ground. She'll get captured, and she's got other birds in the nest that need her. So anyone that finds a hatchling or nestling on the ground, we need to pick it up and get it warm and then make decisions. But keeping it on the ground for hours doesn't help. So these birds either have to go back into the original nest or they have to go into care. Now, that's where you have to make some decisions. So in terms of going into the original nest, the first thing is, do you know where the nest is? You got to make sure it's the correct nest because there may be more than one nest in a tree. And then the biggest obstacle is, can you really reach the nest? Because these birds know how to make nests way up high, 30 feet up. The ladders don't reach it. So, it's not going to be easy to get that baby bird back. And the other thing is, why did the bird come out of the nest in the first place? Did a predator find the nest and the baby just kind of got tossed out? Maybe the nest wasn't in good condition. And we find that sometimes after big storms that the nest, deteriorated to the point where it's not holding the birds together really well. So if we put the baby bird back in a nest that no longer is really functional, the bird's just going to fall out again. But there's more to it than that. These birds didn't fly to the ground like fledglings would. They went splat. And if they splat on the soft grass, maybe they didn't get hurt, but maybe they did get hurt. All right. A lot of times, if you look at the abdomen of these birds, you see these blue and black bruising on it, kind of a purplish color, and that's going to indicate internal bleeding. They can break their legs. They can really get head trauma. So if a bird is injured, it can't go back. All right. There's also a condition we call BAR, Bright Alert Responsive. That is a wildlife rehabilitator term that we use. It basically means the bird has normal behavior. So normal behavior for a little bird like this means that if mama comes around, it's going to be able to sit up, pop its head up, open its beak, make the sounds to say, mama, put that bug in my mouth. Now, if the bird's been on the ground for a long time, even if it's not injured, it's going to get cold. It didn't have food for a while. It could be lethargic. So if I put a bird that's cold and lethargic back in the nest, mama's not going to feed it. The bird's not opening its mouth. She's got other hungry babies to feed, and it's a lot of work to feed babies. So again, the bird that's cold and lethargic, she basically is going to say, I can't help you, because she just doesn't have that capability. Now, what I sometimes do when I hear about that, if the bird's really not injured and I can reach the nest, as a wildlife rehabilitator, I can bring the bird in, I can warm it up, I can give it fluids and some calories. It comes back to being bright, alert, and responsive, and then I can put it back in the nest. I want to talk about some of the do's and don'ts of renesting, okay? This is the one where there's the most misinformation. So let's say there's one baby bird on the ground. It's a nestling or a hatchling, okay? And there's other baby birds in the nest with the mama. So what I hear a lot that people say is make a substitute nest, even if you can't reach the original nest, put that baby bird in the substitute nest and put it on the tree as high as you can. That is on the internet. A lot of people do it. I'm sad here to tell you it does not work. And let me explain why. So you put the baby bird that doesn't have hardly any feathers, that can't thermoregulate, can't keep itself warm, in a substitute nest. Even if you get the mama and papa bird to feed that baby bird during the day, at nighttime, brooding happens in the original nest, and the baby bird basically freezes to death. Okay. Mama stays with her original nest. She cannot be in two places at once. Now, there is a purpose for substitute nests, and I'll tell you what that is. Let's say the whole nest falls down. There was a huge windstorm. All the nests came down. All the babies came down. We can help the parents. We can make a substitute nest, put all the babies in one nest, put that nest back in the tree, and watch the parents go to attending their babies. So there is a purpose for substitute nests, but it is for when the whole nest comes down, not when there's a baby bird with hardly any feathers, all by itself, cold and lonely. So that's one of the messages we need to get out there, folks. Now, when it comes to, making a substitute nest, if that's what we decide to do, again, there's lots of mistakes that get made. For cup nesters, I personally like things like wicker baskets because they come in all sizes and they have handles, which makes it really easy to attach them to trees. They're kind of a natural material, and the best part is they have these drainage holes. It's natural drainage for it. And that is important because, again, our nests are outdoors and it's going to rain. So I don't want anything that is going to fill up with water. And that means if anybody uses any kind of plastic container, like margarine containers, people have to remember to drill holes in the bottom for drainage, because if you get a plastic container, looks really great, but the first time it rains, it turns into a swimming pool. And our baby birds don't want a swimming pool. Now, we have cup nesters, like open nesters like the American robin. We also have cavity nesters, things like the eastern bluebird and all the woodpeckers. They like to be in cavities in trees, and sometimes a problem happens like somebody cuts down a tree, doesn't know that there's birds inside, everybody comes toppling down. We have to figure out what to do when that happens. You know, sometimes people get very creative. They can take part of that tree that came down and actually turn that into a nest box and attach it to a tree nearby. But we also can use different types of birdhouses and put that in a nearby tree, put the babies in it, and see if we can get the parents to be able to, hear the sounds of the babies and go use that nest. I think cavity nesters are harder to re-nest. The reason is it's just a little more dangerous. It's harder to know the correct size of the hole. Is it too big? Is it too small? If it's too big, if it's so easy for a predator to reach in, we can have problems with keeping the baby safe, but it is an option. All right, and here's some more do's and don'ts of re-nesting. I've got a lot of those do's and don'ts. Part of the problem is where we put the nest. We're not thinking like a mama and papa bird. So if you look at these nests right now in the tree, these are examples of things I don't like. So one of the things is bird's nest should be basically the same size as the nest that the original nest was. The parents want that nest to be basically hidden in the tree. And what a lot of people do when they're making a substitute nest is they make something that is humongous, sticks out like a sore thumb. It's like a target for every predator that's out there. And it's scary for the parents. They just don't get, what is this big thing in a tree? The other thing is, look how close these nests are to the trunk of the tree. That is not where parents put their nests. I mean, cavity nesters are a little different, but for open cup nesters, you want something that's out on a branch that's hard for a predator to reach. Because right now with these type of nests that you're seeing in these pictures, you can have a cat crawl up it, reach the nest. You can have a raccoon crawl up it, reach the nest. Even the eastern gray squirrels will eat the babies. We want to make it harder for predators. So trying to hang something on a branch that really makes it hard for predators to crawl out on is something that we should be trying to do. We want to make sure the nest is very securely fastened wherever we're putting it, because what I've learned about birds is the parents don't want to jump down into a container. Occasionally they'll do it, but most of the time what they want to do is perch on the end and then bend down and put that bug in the baby bird's mouth. That is more natural to them. So if something is too deep where they have to jump down because they can't reach the baby bird's mouth, they may not like it. They may not decide to use it. And we've got to make sure also that the birds will not have the nest so tippy that if they land on it, everything tips out. So we've got all that going on for them. Okay. And also we definitely want to make sure there's leaves overhead. Leaves kind of protect the nest from hawks and things that are flying over to harm the babies. It keeps rain out, and also on a very hot sunny day, it makes it a little shadier. I ask people not to use cold green grass for material inside a nest. It looks natural and people think, babies like kind of the natural look. The trouble with cold grass is that it's a little bit too cold for the babies. It's full of water. Green grass is full of water. It makes the babies very, very cold. Okay. So we don't want to use that. We don't also want to use material such as, say, flannel or anything like that, because again, these nests are outdoors, and if it rains, what's going to happen is the material get wet and it takes a while to dry. What do birds use for nesting material? They tend to use dried grasses, or they will use twigs. And that's wonderful because when it rains, they dry really fast as soon as the sun comes out. And that means the babies stay warmer. Here are two very common mistakes we really have to educate the public on. People wait too long after they put baby birds back in a substitute nest. It's a real big problem. I've had people call me at 4 o'clock in the afternoon saying, I put the baby birds back at 8 o'clock. I haven't seen the parents yet. You know what? In my experience, if the parents are around, you will find them going to the nest usually within minutes. Some birds are a little shy. You might see them kind of take a little while. They're approaching the nest. They're a little nervous. They may go back and forth a little bit before they go in. But I never wait more than 1 at the most 2 hours to give the parents a chance. So if they're not there in 2 hours, something's wrong. Either the parents aren't around, that's a possibility, or whatever I created for them, they don't like. But if I wait too long, that's hours where a baby is cold and a baby's not being fed. And we know these baby birds grow really fast and they need the food. I've also said to folks, don't leave babies out overnight. Most of our birds are what we call diurnal, which means they're day birds. So as soon as dusk happens, the baby birds the mother and father birds are in the trees and roosting for the night. There's no benefit to leaving baby birds overnight in a nest. There's none at all. They're just going to get cold. So if you're trying to do a re-nesting, and let's say it's, an hour before dusk and the parents aren't there, bring the birds in for the night, keep them warm, then you can try again in the morning. But keeping them out overnight, that's just not a great idea. And there's a myth that a lot of people have still that are out there that birds have a good sense of smell. Turkey vultures have a good sense of smell, but that's kind of the exception to the rule. And quite frankly, I never understood why turkey vultures would want to have a good sense of smell, since they like roadkill. It stinks, but maybe that's how they find it. But for other birds, we should not be handling birds with bare hands. That's for their protection, not getting our scent on them. It's also for our protection not to get any germs, because we do know that there's germs out there. But will it stop a parent from, going back to her baby if someone from the public picks it up with bare hands? No, that's not going to stop them at all. They will not reject their young due to a human handling it. Now let's move on to fledglings. We've been talking about hatchlings and nestlings. So fledglings, well, they don't belong in a nest. Mother Nature has basically said that as the birds get bigger, they're going to get too big for their nests. They're starting to flap their wings and they want to practice flying. They can't do that in the nest. So what they do is very, very simple. They have enough feathers, they glide down to the ground, but they're not competent at flying. They may be able to fly a little bit. They generally don't have what we call up flight, where they can fly up to a tree, but they're on the ground and the parents are feeding them on the ground and taking care of them and doing a lot of teaching at that point. Sometimes people try to put them back in the nest. They're going to just glide right back down again. We're kind of wasting our time. One of the calls I get sometimes is there were 4 babies in a nest, 3 fledged down, 1 is still there. Now what do we do? Well, I ask people to get patient about that, because it may have been the one baby that's a little developmental delays in it, maybe a little slower. A lot of times they will come down. It might be hours after the other birds do come down. There are times that baby just is really delayed and the parents kind of give up and they move out of the area. And if that's the case, that is a bird that will come into wildlife rehabilitation. And let's remember, some birds have complete flight out of the nest, like these guys, okay? A lot of the swallows and swifts, they can fly as soon as they leave the nest. They might fly back to the nest and fly around a little bit. They should never be found on the ground. If you see swallows and swifts on the ground, that means there's a problem. Doesn't matter the age. If they're on the ground, that's a problem. They need to be brought to a federally permitted wildlife rehabilitator immediately. And we've had some problems. I think climate change is a little bit to blame for this. So we've had problems with premature fledging of birds. One of the things has been overheating of nests, and that's been happening for birds that like to nest like in eaves of barns that don't have very good ventilation. If we get a whole string of really hot days, the 95-degree days, those barn roofs become scorching hot and babies get overheated. And there may be a point where they're so overheated that they, out of desperation, they fledge to the ground before they should. So that can be a real problem. We have lots of solutions for that. Sometimes, we see if we can get some ventilation into that barn and kind of cool it off and get them right back in the nest. Sometimes they're too debilitated. We have to put them into care. Sometimes we can move the nest a short distance and make it work. Again, this is one of those case-by-case situations for wildlife rehabilitators. The other one that's a big deal these days has been mite infestations. And I have to tell you, I hate feather mites. Ugh, they're really gross. You pick up a baby bird and they're swarming up your sleeve. Ah, not my fun day at all. So, this is something where occasionally there's such a mite infestation for birds that are in the nest, literally hundreds of mites on the birds, torturing them with all that itching. And they leap out of the nest. This is, again, case-by-case decision, what to do. I've actually had conversation, you might know Mara Silver. She works a lot with cliff swallows, and they were having last year a really bad year with mite infestations. And there were ways to be able to get the baby birds, kind of get the bugs off of them, killed, and then either you can kill bugs in a nest for some types of fledgling species, or you might be able to have to put up another substitute nest and put everything back together, get it back to the parent within an hour or so, and then have the parents complete their care of the babies. There's still
Wow.
going to be some mites in the area. There will still be some, but maybe we can reduce the mite population enough that the birds can complete their time as being nestlings in the nest and then fledge at the appropriate time where it's a lot safer for them. So we really, we're having a problem with the mites, and again, overheating, and again, climate change, not good for our birds. So fledglings on the ground. I do ask people, the general public, do you see parents? And one of the problems I have with the general public sometimes is that they see a baby bird on the ground and they want to protect it, so they stand right next to it, and then they wonder why the parent doesn't come by. Well, the parent sees the baby, but it sees that thing called a predator, namely the human, standing next to their baby, and there's no way they're coming down from the tree to feed their baby. So we got to convince people, move away, okay? Watch from a distance. The other call I get probably at least 5 times every year is the baby bird crossing the road. Now, this one requires detective work on my part. So sometimes, we got to remember, birds are not all used to roads. Okay. That's a foreign thing. It should be all beautiful forests and fields and things like that. So sometimes the adults fly across the road and the babies walk across the road, but a car is coming. So now what? So if the baby doesn't get hit by a car, you got a baby bird in the middle of the road. And the question is this an orphan? Or is the parent simply on the other side of the road waiting for it? And that requires detective work, because sometimes all we have to do is pick up the baby bird. It's perfectly fine. It's bright, alert, responsive. Carry it over to a safe spot across the road, step back, and watch the parents fly in to continue feeding it. Sometimes a baby bird in the road is in trouble. Maybe it got dinged by a car and it has to come into care. So again, this is where, I have to ask a whole lot of questions to make the right decision. But these are the guys that are kidnapped by the public who see the baby birds and say, oh no, you can't fly. I have to rescue you. And they pick them up and they bring it inside and they shove Rice Krispies down the throat or whatever they think they have. And then they call me. And a lot of times, if they haven't been mishandled or held on for days, a lot of times I can get it back to the parent. So reuniting for these guys, I have a really good chance of getting a fledgling back to the parent within 12 to 24 hours. It's like in the 90% range. And even really pretty good odds, about 50% range at 48 hours, because the parents hang around looking for their babies. They want their babies. They love their babies. So I want to try to get it back. Now, here's the problem sometimes that people have. They don't like the spot where the baby bird was found. They think down the block is a better spot. Well, that's not going to necessarily work. Here's the thing. When the parents are looking for their baby bird, they're looking for where they last saw it. And they're not just looking, they're listening for that chirp, chirp sound that the babies make when they're hungry. If you move a baby bird past what I call chirping distance, the parents will not get reunited with that baby. And that's a big deal. Now, some birds have a loud chirp, some birds have a soft chirp. Sometimes, yeah, where the baby bird is, it's not ideal. I've said to people, and this has worked, sometimes we have to move the baby gradually, like move it, within chirping distance, let the parent find it, wait a little bit, move it farther in chirping distance, let the parent find it, and you keep going. It might take an hour, it might take 2 hours to get it in a better location. But then you got the parent and the baby together. Maybe that takes 2 hours, but if I have to take that baby in care, that's feeding 14 hours a day. All right. And I'm never going to be as good as the parent. All right. So we want to see if we can get everything together. We try to observe what's going on from a distance, big distance. And usually for some species, you almost have to be indoors or in a car because, if you're anywhere near outdoors, you're viewed as a predator and parents will see you. Now, here's the other thing that I see tons of mistakes on. So birds can look like fledglings, but they're still in trouble. All right. And I'm so grateful for cell phones and people being able to take pictures, because the picture tells me more than the people ever can 99% of the time. So you look at this bird in the picture. Okay. So yeah, it's a fledgling. It's fully feathered. It's got that short tail, but it doesn't look good. So first off, it's not even standing. It's kind of on its butt. All right. Its eyes are closed. All right. Right off the bat, I'm going to say there's something wrong with this bird, because if I approach a fledgling that's bright, alert, responsive, it sees me. It tries to get away. All right. It looks frightened. It's going to try to hop, maybe even fly just a short distance. It wants to get away from me because it's afraid of me. That is normal behavior. So if the bird is sitting there puffed up and lethargic, eyes closed, it's in trouble. It's more trouble than the parent can handle. You know, it might have wounds. It might have what we call fly strike, which means that there was a wound, flies found it, they laid their eggs. If you've ever seen fly strike, it looks like, oh, it's gross. It looks like little sticky pieces of rice, and within 12 to 24 hours, those hatch into maggots. They enter inside the bird, they start chewing. It's like the worst. It's the worst thing you can do for a wildlife rehabilitator is give a bird or any animal with fly strike, because we are in a rush to get it off, because we can't stand maggots. So anytime we have a bird that doesn't look okay, that means we got to take it into care. All right, now this is the hard one for me, location and safety. So, all right, there are so many things that can hurt birds. I mean, it can break your heart. All right. And it doesn't matter if you're rural, suburban, urban, there are dangers everywhere. There might in rural areas be more natural predators than anything else. You know, suburban areas have a ton of domestic outdoor cats and feral cats, and all that can be really bad, as well as the natural predators. And then when you get into urban situations, you get things like streets and cars and people that are trampling birds and construction sites. And oh my goodness, what do we do? This is always a big judgment call. So I'm going to tell you my guiding principles. And believe me, this is the one that keeps me awake at night, because it's hard to know if you've made a good decision or not. So my guiding principle is I want to keep babies with their parents whenever possible. I think I'm a competent wildlife rehabilitator, but I am never as good as the parents. No one is. The parents can follow them around out in the wild. They're not only feeding them, they're teaching them survival skills that I can't do. I can try to teach them to some degree, but what I'm doing is never the same, never as good as what they can do. So my guiding principle is keep the babies with the parents unless they're imminent risk. So let me give you an example of how I might differentiate that. So for instance, somebody might call and say, I've got a mama and some fledglings in my yard. I happen to know the neighbor has an outdoor cat, and I'm afraid that cat sometimes comes in our yard and it's going to eat the baby birds. Do I take them in? It's going to bother me, but I'm going to say no. And the reason I'm going to say no is that right now the birds are safe. And in a short period of time, they may already get flight and they're with their parents. We may have to get a little lucky on this. I mean, I want that outdoor cat to be indoors, you know, and if we can convince the person to do it, that'd be great. It's a hard conversation that rarely works. But if I take in every fledgling because there's an outdoor cat in the neighborhood, it's literally almost every fledgling. And we just don't have the capacity for that. So I'm looking for only taking in the birds that are in imminent risk. So if that outdoor cat has spotted that group, maybe even sadly killed one, I have to take it in, because unless I can convince the homeowner, keep your cat inside, their cat's going to come back and it's going to kill the rest of them. So this is really hard, you know, but I do know, you know, there are a lot of birds that live in cities and they teach their young how to survive. And that's okay. You know, we want them to do it. But this again will be. So I want to tell quickly 2 renesting stories, and I want to first say a couple of things about moving a nest. The main thing is you're not supposed to do it, okay? There are laws that say we protect all federally protected birds, which is any native bird. Any nest should not be moved as long as there are eggs or babies in the nest. If it's just the nest, you know, eggs haven't been laid yet, you are allowed to move or destroy that nest and ask the parents to build someplace else. But if there's eggs or if there are babies in a nest, they're not supposed to be moved. That being said, that law does not get enforced, and there are nests that are moved all the time, and sometimes they have to be moved. Now, let me be clear. If there's an endangered species, if you put one finger on that nest, I am calling the authorities on you. I will not hesitate. All right, don't mess with an endangered species. But I'll give an example. First, this happened about 2 years ago. There was a maintenance worker walking around a factory, and there was a steam pipe. It was a safety valve pipe so that when steam built up in this machine, it would blast out scalding steam to kind of reduce the pressure. And birds built a nest right there. And the guy called me up and said, look, within a couple of hours, steam's going to come blasting out and these guys are going to be killed and blown sky high. That nest had to be moved. There was no way they're going to shut down their factory for 3 weeks. So we could move the nest a short distance. Parents came back. Here's 2 other stories. And now you might think maybe we shouldn't have moved them at all. You're not going to be wrong. But in these cases, there weren't a lot of choices. All right. So the first case was about a camp. All right. It was a camp on a lake, and canoeing was one of the most popular activities that they had. And it was the week before camp opened, and all the staff were around, and they were cleaning and washing things and getting ready for the grand opening. And there was this red canoe, and they took it down off the rack to be able to clean it, and out popped some birds. And they're like, what? Some birds had built a nest in the canoe when it was on the rack. What a great location. Hawks couldn't see from the sky, protected from rain. It was absolutely perfect. But the campers wanted that canoe. Now I tried to convince them, can you put the canoe back? Maybe can you buy another canoe? And I got a lot of resistance. So I tried something a little different. They had a blue canoe that was in poor condition. They weren't planning on using it. So I worked and had this plan in place where look where the nest is, okay? Switch out the red canoe for the blue canoe and exactly where it was, put the nest in the blue canoe exactly where it was, and step back and see if it works. It took a whole minute, and Mama Bird was back there feeding her babies. It was perfect. She didn't care if it was a blue canoe instead of a red canoe. She had her canoe, she had her nest, she had her babies. They roped off the area, and everybody was fine, and the babies fledged. So it was a success. It would have been better if they hadn't moved it, but you know what? It worked. But now I'm going to tell you a weirder story. Now, this one drove me crazy, and this happened last year. So this gentleman owned this landscaping company, and he called me up and said, hey, I've been driving my mulch truck with a bird's nest in it for 3 days. Now, my first reaction was, what? 3 days? You're calling me now 3 days? Are you kidding me? Okay, I don't say it like that to people because I have to be calm and professional. But that's what I was thinking, like, oh my God, these birds are going to be dead, right? So I said, okay, give me a picture of the birds, thinking they were going to be dead, and I, wasn't going to work. Picture in the bottom showed there were alert birds begging for food. I'm like, well, how the heck did that happen? So it turns out we had really, really, good parents there. It's that, as soon as it was dawn, they were feeding the birds until the truck was leaving at 9 o'clock. And then when the truck parked at 5, they were feeding the birds. And I don't know how, but the warmth of the truck in the summer sun kept the birds alive with the warmth. And I'm thinking to myself, this is amazing. These birds deserve to be saved. But there's clearly a mama there because he says every time he parks the truck, the mama is stowing there. And I didn't want to make them an orphan. So I thought about the canoe trick and I said, hey, by any chance, do you have like a truck you're not using? You can park there, put the nest in. I'm really proud of myself coming up with this because, I know he's not going to buy a new truck and he already told me he's not going to park that truck for weeks. And he said, well, let me find out. I'll hang up. And that's around 5 o'clock. And about 8:30 at night, he called up and said, hey, you never guess what I did. I'm like, oh, what did you do? He said, well, I didn't want to find another truck, so I decided to spend my day, instead of eating supper, building a cinder block castle for the baby birds. I'm like, seriously? Get me a picture. He said, yeah, it took about 3 tries. I had a design where, mom had to pop in from the top and she didn't like it. And I thought about the fact it might rain in there and that's no good. So I made this design where mom could pop in off the side And at first she was like, what? And she didn't know where her babies were, even though it was exactly where she had the babies in the truck. It was in the same spot where I parked. She didn't get it. Duh, really? But what he did that was so smart, he stood way back. He had some pebbles. He threw the pebbles at the cinder blocks, and the birds were baby cheep, 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 because they got startled by the pebbles hitting it. And Mama Bird's like, what? That's my babies. Where? Where? Then the chirping stopped. He threw another pebble. Cheep, cheep, cheep. Mama gets closer. What? Where are my babies? Threw another pebble. Cheep, cheep, cheep. Mom goes, ah, jumped in, found her babies, went out, got a bug. He could hear the sounds of the hungry chirps go to the happy chirps. And Mom now had a place to raise her babies and didn't have to worry about them going on a road trip every single day. Did this have worked? No, but it did. Would it have been better to have done something like don't move the nest? Well, in that case, it wouldn't have worked. So you know what? Getting creative sometimes is necessary. I'm just going to show you this really fast, just to, because it's a cute little video. I'm not going to show the whole thing. And you recognize these robins. Here's the papa and the baby being fed. And what I just want to point out with this is that, this baby is not just getting fed. This baby's imitating the father, learning so much, trying to figure out where the bugs are. I mean, there is so much learning going on that it so pays for us to make sure we try to keep the babies with their parents. That's where they want to be. That's where they should be. And I'm going to make every effort as a wildlife rehabilitator to get them to stay together because that's what they should do. And there's a close up. Oh my God, you're so adorable. Okay. All right. And I'm going to stop the video and whoops. Let's see. Come on. Hang on. Doesn't want to keep going. So yeah, it really doesn't want to keep going. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'm going to stop the share in a second and see if you have any questions. There. So let's see, are you putting questions in the chat or people just want to unmute themselves? Whichever way works. Okay, because right now I don't think I see anything in the chat. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Hold on.
Hi, my name is Dan. I'm an Alan Berger. And I'd like to know if you could reinitiate your phone number in the chat or anywhere else you can figure out real quick, please.
Yes, I'm happy to put my phone number in the chat. Let me just do this.
Thank you.
See if my fingers work late at night after shoveling for hours. And what I do is I tend to answer the phone basically 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. I tend to not answer the phone as much after that. And the reason is I need at least an hour downtime or I never sleep. And I get up wicked early in the morning. When it's wildlife baby season, I have to get up about 4:30 in the morning to get ready to start feeding by 5 o'clock. Because by 5 o'clock it's daylight and the baby birds are already saying, feed me, woman.
And
And
where's your base of operations?
I'm right in my own home. I have I'm
Good
at
cow.
591 Stage Road in Cummington. I have a little log home and I have a little rehab room. It's not very big, but I can do I think this year I did about 220 animals, mostly birds and a few rabbits, which is my second love. Yeah, so it's right in my home. It's just me. I don't have volunteers. Given, where it's located in my home, it's impossible to have volunteers without people going in and out of my home nonstop. If I was rich, I would build a separate facility and be able to have more volunteers. And that will happen when I win Powerball, but it hasn't happened yet. So right now it's a small facility in my home. But I think I do a lot of good, even though it's not the biggest facility. And
If you're ever looking for volunteers, you let me know.
okay. There is a question that Trad, have you ever had an issue where you had to reunite a baby bird with a cowbird parent? So putting,
Good question.
cowbird parents don't they're not going to have their babies. They put their babies in somebody else's nest. I've had problems where people have been really angry that there's been a cowbird in a nest and they just don't want it. But that's their natural history. And yeah, there's a point when they fledge and they can get together. I've not had any situation where there's been a cowbird that needed to get together with the parent for that last stage or anything like that. So, you know, that I haven't had. But I had last year, and I was really upset. There was a cowbird baby that was in a nest of Carolina wrens, and the person loved the wrens, decided to hate the cowbird, took the cowbird out and put it on the grass and basically killed it. And it wasn't a good thing. So, you know, cowbirds, they're native birds too. They have a strange way of living, you know, but that's their natural history. And you know, I think
Yep.
birds need to be themselves. Okay, do you ever join forces with Tom Riccardi in Conway? He only does raptors. His animals would eat my animals. So Tom, when a raptor call comes in, I call Tom. When he gets the passerine calls, he directs them to me. So in terms of joining forces, we really have his guys eat meat, mine don't. So, all right. Do you ever work with any avian vets in your work as a rehabber? As a wildlife rehabilitator, you are required to have a veterinarian to work with you. It's you cannot even get your permit without that kind of sign off. Because in Massachusetts, you need the state permit as well as the federal permit. And to get the state permit renewed, you have to have sign off by your veterinarian. So you have to work. Now, that being said, you're right. Are there people that are specialists in avian species? There's not that many near me in Cummington. Now that I have the amount of experience I have, there's very few things I send to veterinarians. But if I really had something critical, I mean, I've leaned on things like Julie Shanahan at Valley Vet and Lee is very good with avian species. I will send birds to Tufts. I have people that will drive to Tufts Wildlife Clinic where they can do diagnostic testing, particularly if there's things like HPAI that I'm worried about. So it's really a judgment call. But if it's something like a fracture, I get training. I deal with 99% of the fractures all by myself because that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. If you mentioned that if we were ever to find a young swallow on the ground, it would need to be brought to a federal rehab facility. What's the difference between a state and federal rehab facility and which is yours? Okay, very good question. Okay. Basically, there's two licenses you need to work with native birds. The state permit that you need, that's where I teach a webinar about. You have to pass the state exam. It's 100 questions, very challenging, and it gives you the ability to rehabilitate. Basically, it's mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and very few avian species. The only avian species you can rehabilitate with the state permit are the non-natives. Okay, so things like the house sparrow, European starling, rock doves, mute swan, that sort of thing. Those are the ones that you can do with the state permit. The federal permit is done by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. State permit, I should say, is Division of Fisheries and Wildlife or Mass Wildlife. The federal permit is U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the reason for that is that birds travel big distances. They travel from state to state. They travel from country to country. So Massachusetts can't be in charge of birds that cover so much territory. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife is responsible. And in order to do any native birds, you have to first get your state permit. Then you have to work for 100 hours with a person with a federal permit under that category, be it songbird, raptors, waterfowl, and then make a whole portfolio, send it in, and then, you know, they can hopefully approve you for the federal permit. And you get to work with native birds. Okay. We start people out with the non-native birds so they get practice, because the skills you get with the non-native birds, which are very, very hardy birds, you can transfer to the more sensitive native birds. But yeah, my facility, I have state and federal permits. I have the ability to do native birds. And honestly, there's only a handful in the whole state. It is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's a high volume call. There's not enough helping hands, and I desperately need people. The problem is I'm willing to train people, but you have to be able to literally put food in a bird's mouth. Some of the birds, like wrens, need feeding every 15 minutes for 14 hours a day. That's all. You basically don't get to leave your house. You're feed, repeat the whole day. And it is kind of tiring. Actually, it's exhausting. And I do it because I love it, because they're
Yeah.
so wonderful. Okay. What
Could
about
I say
antibiotics?
something?
Sure.
Cool, maybe not. Hey, Judy. Thank you. I've enjoyed the presentation. And I wanted to bring up a little story about your neighbor down in Williamsburg, and the neighbor of the Hampshire Bird Club. We had a school. Chimney was inhabited by roosting chimney swifts, about 40 to 50 birds that we were observing. You've probably seen the new public safety complex. The chimney was taken down. When I spoke to people on the Public Safety Complex Committee, there was no discussion of the destruction of this roosting habitat.
Oh, no.
Where we're at now is there's actually a new town commons committee that surrounds the public safety complex. And I don't know if you want to generally comment, but I happen to be, or I decided to be on the town commons committee. And I'm going to be proposing that we build an artificial, this is something that's being done, but I haven't seen it locally, but there are hundreds of them. Often I've seen them in other states, especially Texas, hundreds of artificial chimney swift towers for
Yes.
nesting or roosting chimney swifts. And I hope to propose it for the Hampshire Bird Club, that we maybe support that. And it's in discussion of our conservation committee. But I don't know if you have any thoughts too on how this happened and how it does happen, roosting birds, destruction of their habitat, and no discussion of this really going on. But it's a
This
tough
is horrifying. This is the first time I've heard about that. And maybe because I isolate myself in Cummington and I never get to hear anything, but I'm absolutely horrified that there be no regard for chimney swifts, which are in severe decline. One of the hardest birds to rehabilitate is a chimney swift. They're amazing. They're intelligent. They're just most awesome birds, but extremely hard to rehabilitate because they never self-feed. You have to feed them, hand feed them until you literally release them. Unlike other birds, you can train to self-feed. Very, very difficult birds to raise. And honestly, I totally support that. And if you ever need to pick my brain on that, there are people that do have artificial chimneys. My suggestion is, if you want some help, Sunny Kellner, I don't know if you've heard her. She's in Sharon Audubon in Connecticut, is one of the chimney with swift specialists, not just of Connecticut, but she takes in chimney swifts from Massachusetts and from New York and all over, literally hundreds of them. And she would be a great resource as
name
well.
again, please.
Her name is Sunny Kellner. Sharon, she's a director of Sharon Audubon in Sharon, Connecticut. And I certainly can get you connected. Give me a call and I can help you get connected. She's fantastic. And she's raised tons of chimney swifts. But yes, no, that's so sad. They need to have that place. They need to be able to have that place to come back to. So yes, we need to get it done. Oh,
Thank you.
okay.
I just wanted to point out that you have a great Facebook page and you shared a beautiful story today about the red-throated loon and how it takes a community to rehabilitate sometimes.
A lot of times, and I'm really lucky. I think this is a fantastic community. I really do. I think people, when I've asked for help, people have stepped up each and every time. If I need quick transport to Tufts, I mean, we had people transporting from Lee to Tufts in North Grafton in a snowstorm to save one loon. Okay. How many people would be willing to do that? It's just amazing people stepped up for that. So yeah, I can't do this alone. And it's absolutely true. I'm one person. There are tons of birds out there. There's many a days I feel overwhelmed and feel like, oh my God, I can't keep doing this. It's the community that supports me, that keeps me going. And without that support, I just probably would just curl up and hide in my bed all day. But it's your community that keeps giving me words of encouragement when things get tough. So you guys all are fantastic. I see another thing. What about antibiotics when you think a baby bird has been attacked by a cat? Oh yes, attacked by a cat, antibiotics. I tend to use Clavamox. It's probably one of the more effective antibiotics that I use for birds. There are definitely some other ones, but Clavamox is good. It's not, it doesn't have some of the restrictions that something like Baytril does, which is, something that we're being asked to kind of cut back on as much as we can. So Clavamox it works. I've saved a lot of baby birds attacked and not gotten the infection. Okay. All right. I think that's it. Any other
All right.
questions?
Thank you so much, Judy. If there's not any other questions, Monique?
All set.
Okay, all right. Thank you
Thank you
so much.
again. Yeah, and thank you everybody for allowing me to come in and share some of my stories. And you guys, again, you're part of the team that helps. And, thank you. That's all I can say. I really appreciate every one of you.
Excuse me,
Thanks,
I
Judy.
have
you.
one quick question. I have
Sure.
one quick question. If a person volunteers with you, and I've got years of experience of volunteering different organizations, would I have to get certified from the state?
Well, again, right now I don't use volunteers just because we're not having, there's a privacy issue just because people will be hanging out in our living room and my husband does value some privacy on that one. But volunteers do not have to be, volunteers do not have to have any kind of training from the state. They obviously have to be trained to know what to do, but you can be a volunteer and work with any animal if you're working in someone else's facility. The licensing comes in when you're having an animal in your own home. But you can be a
Oh.
volunteer in a facility, and it's just a question of getting trained to be able to handle it correctly. My little tiny rehab room, it's really hard to have multiple people in there, and because I also have small bunnies are terrified. They're even more terrified than birds. So anybody walking into the room, they literally can die from the shock of having strangers. So I really have to balance what I'm doing at different times. So
Oh.
there may come a point I'm going to need a volunteer just to get a day off once in a while and, and to get some respite. But I mean, that's, right now on a steady basis, I don't. There are other people. You can try Hilltown Crow, I believe sometimes uses volunteers. But honestly, after that, there's nobody in this area with the federal permit. So, we're kind of isolated.
Are you free to accept phone calls if should a volunteer come your way like myself and not particularly care if I work with you or anybody else in the region on that birding specialty?
Um, you know, in terms of accepting phone calls to help find volunteers or placement of volunteers, I might be able to help, I might not. Again, there's not that many facilities. The facilities where they need volunteers are basically on the Cape, like Wild Care, New England, you know, wildlife, things like that on the Cape. They use a
Right.
lot of volunteers for birds. Other than that, the volunteers tend to be more mammals. Berkshire Wildlife Services will use volunteers, but they do things like, raccoons and fox and things like that. So, no, I don't, there aren't facilities to volunteer for birds. For me, what I need the most help on usually is just getting enough money to keep going because it does cost me about $300 or $350 a week once the season really begins. So for me, it's all about fundraising.
Yeah.
So, and I'm bad at that.
Oh, I'm good at it.
I hate asking people for money, but I'm a
That's part of the
nonprofit. I have
job. It's no big deal.
it's I'd
Just
rather
putting
feed a
yourself
baby
out
bird.
there. Just
Yeah.
putting yourself out there and being comfortable.
Not
You know.
comfortable. I'd rather feed a baby bird. I'd rather be pecked by a pileated woodpecker, okay?
There you go.
All right, any last questions? I know we're getting close to 8 o'clock.
I'm sorry, quick question, maybe not quick. So if you find an injured bird, and I'm not talking about necessarily a fledgling, but say a window strike or something, and you can't get a hold of somebody right away, you're trying to call you or somebody else, what's the best way to deal with the bird in the meantime? I assume keep it warm and dark or whatever, or put it in a box. Is that what would
Yeah,
you say?
and sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. The window strike, everything kind of changed in terms of procedure. It used to be that if the bird bounced off the window in about 10, 15 minutes, looked good and flew off, or okay.
Yeah.
They did research, and it's not true. They did research and figured out that every single bird that hits a window has some level of, brain injury. It might be a mild concussion. might be a brain bleed, it might be brain swelling. And birds that look really good and fly off, sometimes they die later on. And I've had birds that
Yeah.
are window strikes that have been brought to me, and I'm like, you look nice and perky, you're going to be fine. And then in the morning, they've been dead because they've had a brain bleed or brain swelling. So virtually any window strike should be brought inside to monitor for at least 24 hours, because what I can do is I can give it something, like an anti-inflammatory medication. I can put it on oxygen if it's having trouble breathing, and also protect it from predators, because if it has a brain concussion, it's going to be sitting there and not be aware that a predator is approaching. We use the term warm, dark, and quiet. If a bird has a head injury, just room temperature. We don't want it too warm, because that actually make a brain bleed or brain swelling worse. I am very reachable. The only time I may not be reachable is from 8 p.m. To 8 a.m. If you can't reach me at that point, again, it's putting it in a box and keep it, if it's a baby, it's warm, dark, and quiet. If it's an adult, ambient temperature, dark and quiet, just quiet, quiet, quiet. And then give me a call in the morning, and we'll deal with it as soon as we can. But during the day, I'm going to answer every phone call.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
All right, I think we're good, Judy. Thank you again.
Thank you
Fabulous.
again. A great job.
All right, thank you.
Thank
All
you
right,
so much.
everybody,
That was
have a
great.
great night and